Hello and welcome to Capital City Beads. In this tutorial, we will be making a pair of simple beaded fringe earrings on a wire frame. If you've been here a while and follow us on social media, you know I love bead mixes. Custom one-of-a-kind bead mixes are one of our top-selling products here at Capital City Beads. I'll be using 3 different bead mixes in this design, 2 size 11 round mixes and 1 size 11 2-cut mix. 2-cut beads are cylindrical in shape and vary in size. This gives them lots of extra sparkle and add really beautiful texture. You will also need a soft nylon beading thread. I will be using Nymo size B and size 12 English beading needles. We will be attaching the beads to a circle wire frame. You can use this same technique to attach beads and fringe to any wire or metal shape. Click the link in the description of this video to shop supplies. We are going to start out by cutting about 8 feet of thread. Thread your needle onto one end of the thread. My scissors are kind of at the end of their life and they're not very sharp, so my thread got a little frayed. That's okay, just smooth it out and trim it down and hide the tip of the thread between your thumb and your index finger and lie the eye of the needle right onto that little speck of thread and gently push it all the way through. We are not doubling up this thread. Tie the opposite end of the thread in a double knot onto the wire frame, leaving about a 6-inch tail. We will need this extra 6 inches at the end to secure our design and tie off our project. I'm going to refer to my colors as colors A, B, and C. We're going to start by picking up 2 beads from color A. Color A is the color that will be touching the frame. Keep the beads on the needle rather than pushing them all the way down the thread. Pass the needle under the circle. I use my thumb and my pointer finger to stabilize the hoop and keep the beads positioned outside of the wire while I pull the thread through. Next, pass your needle in front of the wire and back up through the second seed bead. Your thread should loop around the wire, securing the beads. The holes of the beads should be positioned on the wire and facing out. Next, string on 1 color A. If you're using a mix, pick any color. Keep the bead on the needle and pass the needle under the hoop wire. Use your fingers to help keep the bead positioned outside the wire while you pull the thread all the way through. Pass the needle back up through that same bead. Add 1 bead at a time using the same technique. Pick up the bead, pass the needle under the wire, around, and back up through that same bead. When using bead mixes, try not to overthink what beads you're picking up. Let it be random and carefree. If you pick up 2 or 3 of the same consecutive color, that's okay. Trust the process and know that it'll look great when it's finished. I used a funky bead that was a little smaller than the others, but I'm going to just leave it. Once the fringe is in, you won't even see that. Continue adding 1 bead at a time till you have attached 11 beads. You need an odd number of beads for a tapered fringe. Go ahead and hit pause and come back when you have 11 beads attached to the frame. Now that you have 11 beads, or any odd number of beads, attached to the frame, we can start the fringe. To increase my production speed of these earrings, I'm using a super simple pattern and picking up the same number of beads per color. Start with 6 color A, then string on 6 color B, and then 6 color C. The trick with bead mixes is to not overthink what colors you're picking up for the mix. Let it be super random. Don't worry if you have a couple that repeat. Patterns happen randomly as well. So just pick up whatever beads you like and don't overthink it. I'm using the cut beads at the end of the fringe. Cut beads tend to have a sharp edge, so I want to add one round seed bead at the end of the project to protect my thread. So after 6 color C, I'm adding 1 color B at the end. Once your fringe is strung, lay the piece on your mat and move all the beads up to the frame. Move the last bead down and out of the way. Skipping that last bead, pass your needle back up through all of the beads, including the one bead that is attached to the frame. Pull your thread all the way through and tighten by holding on to the last bead while pulling the thread in the opposite direction. Position your thread for the next fringe by passing it down through the next bead. Before moving on to your next fringe, adjust your tension so that first fringe isn't too tight. You don't want it sticking straight out. Give it a little pull to give it a little slack. String on the next set of beads, increasing by 2 beads per color. You'll now string 8 beads per color. 8 color A, 8 color B, 8 color C, and if you're using cut beads, add that 1 extra color B to protect your thread. It's always a good idea to double check your counts before securing the fringe. You want to make sure you have the right number of beads. Sometimes you can miss one, or sometimes you might accidentally pick up an extra one, and you want to be sure that we're keeping it consistent. Once all your beads are strung, move that last bead down and out of the way and pass your needle all the way back up and through the beads. Be careful not to skip any of the beads or you will see that thread wrapping around and your fringe will be wonky. Go all the way up through all of the beads and up through the bead that is attached to the frame. Adjust the tension before moving on. If your fringe is pulled too tight, they will be stiff and stick out. If it's too loose, you will see the thread. Play with it gently until you're happy with the look and flow of your fringe. Continue increasing by 2 beads per color as you move through your fringe. Go ahead and hit pause and come back when you've gotten to the middle of your earring and you've completed 6 rows. The 6th row is the longest fringe. You should have added 16 beads per color. Now we will begin decreasing by 2 beads to build the other half of our fringe. Your thread should be coming out of that 7th bead. String on 14 color A beads. Double check that you've strung on the correct amount and push those 14 beads all the way up to the metal frame. Before adding the next color, lay your piece flat and make sure those 14 beads line up with the 14 beads on row 5. Seed beads will always have some variations in size, so you'll need to eyeball each color to make sure they are the same length. I use my needle to help see if they are even. If it's too long or too short, swap some beads out for slightly smaller or slightly larger beads to increase or decrease the length. Next, add 14 color B seed beads. Double check that they line up with the 14 color B beads from row 5. We're going to do the same thing with color C. We're going to add 14 seed beads in color C. I've seen people randomly try to scoop their beads out of their pile. I am not very good at this skill, but I know that is something people do. You can just randomly scoop them. I happened to pick up 5 of the same color, which isn't very random, so I removed those and added a different color. Once you're happy with the length and everything looks even, move that last bead down and out of the way and pass your needle back up through the fringe to secure it to the frame. At this point, the fringe is longer than your needle, so you won't be able to pass through all of the beads at once. So you'll need to go through some of the beads, move them down, go through some more and move them down. Just be careful you don't skip any. Adjust your tension and make sure your fringe is nice and flowy. Then you can move on to the next row, decreasing by 2 beads. Continue adding the fringe, decreasing by 2 beads and checking your length till you have completed all of the fringe. Go ahead and hit pause and come back when you're ready to tie off your earring. We are almost finished, but first we have to get rid of these threads. You should be coming out of the 11th seed bead that is attached to the frame. Pass your needle down through the 10th row and down through a few of the beads. This is going to feel a little awkward and super annoying, but it's an important step. Coming out of any of the beads on the fringe, pass your needle under the beads. Hold the fringe down so your thread doesn't just fall out. Pass the needle under the beads, not in any bead holes, just under them. And before you pull all the way through, wrap your needle around and back down through the loop it creates. Slowly pull the thread so it ties a little hitch knot between the beads. My thread accidentally wrapped around the bead, so I just need to loosen it up a little bit and then reposition it so that knot ties between the beads. You don't want to see any thread wrapping around your beads. Pass your needle down through a few more beads of that fringe to hide the end of that thread and then trim it off. Trim your thread as close to the beads as possible so you don't see any excess. Be sure you do not accidentally cut your fringe. I know that sounds crazy, but I have done it and it sucked, so be careful. We need to tie off that 6-inch tail from the beginning. Thread your needle onto the tail. Pass your needle down through the 11th bead that's attached to the frame, as well as a few of the beads in that fringe. Coming out of any bead on the fringe, pass your needle under the beads. Hold the fringe down so your thread doesn't fall out. Pass the needle under the beads, not in any bead holes, just under them, and before you pull all the way through, wrap your needle around and back down through that loop it creates. Slowly pull that thread so it ties a little hitch knot between the beads. Pass your needle down through a few more beads and trim off the excess. Attach any ear wire of your choice and create the second earring. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you had fun creating these earrings. All the materials used in this video can be found at capitalcitybeads.com and are linked in the description. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please subscribe and find us on Instagram or TikTok at Capital City Beads.